We have the next slide, please. This relates to the Salvation Army homeless baby boomer study that Richard's already referred to. I think it's important to recognise that these are national figures as opposed to Auckland-based figures, but they're still instructive. Home ownership rates are dropping, as you can see, with an anticipated third of future seniors expected to be renting with government assistance. So it's important to recognise that you've got 30 to 35% of future retirees will rent and require government assistance, as it points out. And if you project those figures into the future, you can see that they're going to increase considerably by 2025. Can we have the next one, please? So by 2030, the picture will look very different. A very large number of seniors will be in incredibly difficult circumstances. By 2030, 200,000 over 65s won't be able to own their own home, and they won't be able to afford to rent. So where does this put the council? Well, we know that local government is only one of a number of stakeholders involved in seniors housing, but council can and does have a huge influence because of the many hats that it wears. It takes a lead role as a planner. It is very influential as an advocate and is doing much important housing work here. It can use its regulatory role to increase incentives. Council already has a partner with the Selvin Foundation, for example, in the provision of services to older people. And of course, you are the direct provider of housing with 1,412 units and 380 on the waiting list for those units as of January this year. Council has land within the current villages and in many other locations, which might, we believe, should be considered for further social housing for older people. This might be a partnership basis, for example, with council providing long-term lease and land, and considering the options of working with iwi and other social housing providers. Can we have the final slide, please? So given the context of increasing numbers of seniors, given the context of increasing house prices, given the context of the increasing numbers of retirees renting, and the fact that MB has funded Kay Somerville Smith to research the area of seniors and renting, we are here in support of the motion today, which is agenda item 8, to change the wording in the Housing Action Plan to increasing the existing number of units for older people. This increase is not just desirable, it is absolutely essential if we are to house vulnerable older people in the future. This needs to be part of a wider strategy. We need to plan now for 10 years. In 10 years' time, it'll be too late, and Auckland Council must take a lead in this planning. We are aware that there is currently some policy work being undertaken to establish baseline information. We are confident that this will give rise to the specific actions for seniors housing, which will help alleviate a looming crisis. There is an urgent need to explore sustainable solutions if older Aucklanders are to live with dignity in the world's most livable city. We hope you will support this motion, and thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you today.
Judy, thank you very much. Now, Russell, did you have anything to add? I won't invite Margaret if she had anything to add, because she can't.
I think Judy has said very clearly what we've been thinking, but I do think there's a very deep logic about looking after this increasing area of population when we are also constantly putting in new roads for increasing traffic. and I do wonder whether people matter more than cars, or well-being of community than economy. They all run together, but people care is really important.
Russell, thank you. Any quick questions? Thank you. Can I warmly thank you for an excellent presentation, and as I say, we'll be moving straight to the notice of motion, hopefully, to have the discussion. So our final speaker on this issue is Bill Rayner, our Zone Director from Grey Power, and again, Bill, well known to everybody. Welcome, Bill. You've got 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank Councillor Casey for bringing this issue forward, and also acknowledge the contribution made by the seniors group and Richard Northey, who perhaps spoke in the broader context of the critical need for pensioner housing in the city. I was intrigued to go back and see that the motion related to the Auckland Housing Action Plan of 2012, and I note there that the Mayor at the time highlighted the housing as the city's second most important issue after transport. He said Aucklanders must be housed in a way they can afford. And he mentioned that housing had become a problem of such scale that the Auckland Plan referred to it as a housing crisis. He was concerned at that time that the median house price was more than $500,000. You'll now all be aware it's now reached $820,000, and the crisis has moved from, and the position has moved from a crisis to a catastrophe. I think the difficulty in a city like Auckland, where the development pressures are on this high immigration, it's the vulnerable that suffer. And I think the seniors are at the front end of that vulnerable aspect, and there's several aspects that come into it. Grey Power's been working with the senior community in the pensioner courts for over 18 months now, when the issue first arose, when the rents were increased from the sort of subsidised rents of the legacy councils to the 30% of income base. That worked out extremely well. I think it was appreciated by the council. It led to the formation of resident groups that had a voice with the council, which didn't exist before. And at the same time, it threw up a lot of issues in the broader context of pensioner housing that were perhaps unaware of. And one that actually continues, which concerned me, is the fact there are a number of units still vacant in those courts after all the publicity, and that's something that's to be addressed. I think the real issue that we do have with the courts, as mentioned, about 1,400 of them, they tend to be in the north, the west and the south, because Auckland City sold off their stock under John Banks some years ago. And I think the key thing is it's critical, and the essence of Councillor Casey's resolution is what Grey Power was advocating, both to the annual plan submissions and also in the context of our discussions with the council and Auckland Properties, is that the existing land that is where the courts are, as they get redeveloped, should be used exclusively for the extra pensioner units. The policy now says there will be no less, but the point to pick up, there will be redevelopment, there will be room for more units in the context of what exists now. The seniors panel and Richard spoke about the broader context of more housing in general, but I think it's important to recognise the small step right now is quite critical. And I think it's not realised. I think the figures presented too are very revealing, but there's real pressure on the seniors in the city now, not just the bottom end, but the top end as well. The numbers involved in housing are beyond comprehension to the seniors. 800,000 for a house when you probably bought one for 30,000, and people earned incomes of probably $50,000, $60,000 during their working lives. And we have a situation now, even with our Grey Power committees, I know 5 of my personal associates in the Grey Power thing have left the city, and this is a hidden sort of factor that's come into it as well. Some go with a bit of a golden handshake, some go because they just can't afford it, but at the same time there's a dynamic now where a cornerstone of the community in many ways is leaving. And you see in the paper where the pressure's now building up in the Taurangas and the Hamiltons and whatever from that dynamic going out. The other thing that seniors face too in the modern sort of development situation, they suffered from the leaky homes first time round. Now the situation arising with shoddy building practices where they're caught up in that as well. And they don't have the resilience in their finances to handle these. And it's just recently been announced as well that body corporate management problems are rising where seniors, even the wealthier ones, faced with high costs to keep their premises up to date. The other sort of hidden factor in all this problem in the city with the housing at the moment is that the pressures coming on seniors, they look at their children, their grandchildren, and think, how on earth are they going to cope? So they're getting into a situation where they're forced in some ways to set up to help their kids get into a home. So there's a huge dynamic which is rolling around, unfortunately, in the city at the moment. I must admit, I was in Hobart a couple of weeks ago, and if you want to look at a livable city, that's exactly it. It's small, 250,000, lovely environment, just like Auckland, no development pressure, which is the other side of the coin, of course, and I thought, well, we've got a lot of problems here, which of course you know more about than I would. But in the context of it, I just urge you to sort of support this motion. It is small in the overall context of the need, but is a step forward, and it's something that the council can in fact work with. And there's also what you might call a moral aspect. Most of the land involved in the pensioner courts at the moment was developed under a joint government council scheme where the council provided the land and the government provided funding for building. They worked on a self-sustaining basis.
Nearly down the
And
time.
the
Bill.
other point too is some of it was actually donated. So it's not land to be disposed of or sold off to go to the general pot. So that's all I have to say. I would thank my colleagues for their presentations and I would urge you to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Any question? Councillor Cashmore.
Yes, thanks, and thanks, Bill, for advocacy. A couple of points I'd like your opinion on. One is, we have over 50-odd thousand people coming in to Auckland at the moment, so we've got growth pressures that have never been seen before. We are building record numbers of houses, or allowing them to be built by allocating sections, yet we're still struggling to keep up with the demand. Hence, we are getting people seeing the upward movement. The latest figures with an $820,000 average mean price for a house. The article stated that over 40% of those were investor properties. And that's also, with that sort of capital required, you're also looking at a high rental component to get a return. So do you see a solution on that quotient? And the other thing, do you envisage that the supply-demand matrix should be shifted in some way to enable a better balance of ability to build as compared to the people that are coming?
That's a delicate subject. You may recall the very first submission to made, Grey Power got into strife because they suggested we should have a population policy forum to discuss exactly those issues. Yeah. And of course it gets back to the point I made again. I mean, $800,000, even $500,000 isn't an affordable house for most people. No. And for seniors, it's just virtually impossible. And the whole economic aspect has shifted beyond people's ability to cope. It's black and white. There's no shades of grey. It's dead simple, and so people have to move out. You'll never in the current sort of climate. I remember coming to one of the unitary plan discussions where a developer said it costs $350,000 to get a section up in South Auckland. That's before you build a house. And so this is the problem. The concept of affordable housing is presented by the media things. It's a waste of words. Affordable is just not right. So I don't know. I think we've reached the tipping point. There really isn't a solution in the current economic climate in the city for affordable housing.
Oh.
Very true.
Well, we'll give it a crack in our discussion shortly. Bill, thank you very much. And echoing Councillor Cashmore's words, thank you for your advocacy. So
Happy to thank Bill.
I'll move that we thank...
Second.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Walker, did you have a question for
No, I was
Mr.
just
Ray?
going to move thanking Bill.
Second. Oh, lovely. Moved Councillor Walker, seconded Councillor Casey. I'll put that. All those, or should we do it for the whole group as a whole?
And can we receive the presentation?
That's what we were working
Is that there?
towards.
No, it just says
Receive the
thank.
presentation and thank the presenters. Councillor Walker, Councillor Casey, All those in favour?
Aye.
Say aye. Against? Carried. So I thought we would have to change the order, but we don't because there is no local board input. So we'll move, and no extraordinary business, so we'll move straight to the notice of motion. And we'll just get it up on the, so you'll note, councillors and members, it differs a little bit from what is printed in our agenda. And councillors Casey and Watson have added the words subject to approval from Finance and Performance Committee as part of the 16-17 annual plan process, which just puts it in a slightly wider context. There's also been some discussion about whether it's annual plan or LTP, so we'll take a few questions, but I'm actually going to ask our CFO to give us a little bit of advice on the benefit of annual plan versus LTP. Councillor Lee.
Just a technical question, Madam Chair.